What's up, guys? I'm Nicole Rios, and I've got opinions. Today, I am with a amazing person that I've just met from Kentucky. His name is Andrew Cooperrider. He's host of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. He's been a long time in Kentucky politics. He has great information on the candidates. We're going to talk candidates. We're going to talk platform. We're going to talk money, and potentially endorsements and the background influences at play, which I think will be really interesting. This McConnell seat is a big one in the Senate. McConnell had a long time legacy, and now, satisfaction has been dropping quickly. I think it's time for him to exit gracefully. And it's really going to be an interesting race to see who comes up with the win, especially because we have three primary candidates here for the Republican Party that are kind of duking it out. We have two main players and one kind of like backseater, but our backseater kind of has a lot of really interesting connections to our current administration. And it will be interesting to see how the money plays out, how the influence plays out, where and when and if a potential endorsement from Trump shows up. So I just want to give Andrew a second to introduce himself. If there's anything that you want to share about yourself that I haven't already covered, please feel free.
No, yeah, I'm Andrew Cooperrider. I'm the host of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I'm also one of the hosts of Kentucky Voice. So I'm on the radio a few times a week, do podcasts, comment on Kentucky politics. I focus specifically on state level politics. So if you're listening in another state, you may not find my content as engaging just because it is so Kentucky specific. But in this particular case, when it comes to this race, as we talk about the three, people that the media and everybody else is looking at as the major players, and there's a lot of reasons why these three out of the 11 that are filed are the major players, and that goes into Kentucky's ballot access laws as well. But these three players, I've known them all for years. I think I've been at all three of their houses at one point. So, I know these people very well. I know the backgrounds. I know their political histories, and I'm happy to give you some insight on what's going on within the state of Kentucky.
Amazing. So, broadly speaking, I've heard that Kentucky polling can be a little sketch. And I only say that because when we look at the kind of like the horse race a little bit with the polling data on this one, it's a little in and out. I feel like internal polling versus public polling might be a little different. I've seen that even one of the candidates is paying for some of the polls. It seems like trying to figure out the interest there. And so what could you have like just a broad generalization on how accurate you think Kentucky polling is in general?
So what's interesting is that there's only been two quote unquote independent polls done. And so the three main players, so we know, is Nate Morris, who is a businessman. He's kind of a quote unquote newcomer to politics. However, he has been involved, donated money, everything else. But this is his first time running for office. He built up a waste management company called Rubicon. It did very well. He's able to cash out. I think his net worth is like $200-300 million. The company did at one point it got delisted from the stock market exchange because it kind of sunk down. But if you understand how tech startups work, that the fact that you're able to cash out a couple $100 million is considered a success, whether or not the company itself continues on.
For sure.
Um, and then you have Daniel Cameron. So he was the attorney general for the state of Kentucky for 4 years. He ran for governor. He won the Republican primary for governor and then lost to incumbent Andy Beshear. Something to realize, and we'll talk about this because Daniel Cameron did lose to Andy Beshear, is that Kentucky has off-year governor elections. So we have elections 3 out of 4 years, while a lot of places only have them every 2 years. But our governor election falls on an off year. So that was in 2023. And that plays a lot into the dynamics that goes on in that race compared to what we'd expect in November this year. And then finally, you have Andy Barr. He's the Kentucky 6th District Congressman. He's been there since Tea Party days. So I think 2010, 2012 or so. He's been there for a little while. That district has always been considered a little more purple. That's important in this discussion to understand because we're going to talk about Barr's voting record, I'm sure, at some point. And the fact that he's in a purpley district does play into it. It was recently redistricted to make it a little safer conservative, but it has been a historically purple district. So that's the three people that are running that are at the top. As I said, there's a bunch of other candidates running. Um, and they're generally polling in these polls at 2% or less. And so, they don't bring in a lot of money either. And we can have a discussion about money in politics as well. So when you look at the polling, you've seen historically Cameron was far and away in the lead leading up until a few months ago. And that makes sense. Cameron has ran statewide now. He ran in Republican primaries, two other times. He's ran statewide in general elections twice. And so it makes sense that he would have that name ID. There's already been statewide, while Andy Barr does have the 6th district, there is 6 congressional districts, so that's 1/6 of the state. But Daniel Cameron has had statewide already tens of millions of dollars spent on his name ID. So naturally, he was the leader going into it. And then you have Nate Morris and Andy Barr, who have raised far more money. They've been dumping millions into the race, and they've been raising a bit in the polls, but the race has been mainly stuck with Nate Morris somewhere around 15%, Andy Barr somewhere around 22%, Daniel Cameron up around 35%. Now, there was an independent polls done that had Cameron down a percentage point or two to Barr. The audience that they went through and picked for that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially when you consider even the internal polls coming out of Barr's camp has had Cameron in the lead. In fact, he just released one like 3 days ago that had Cameron above him too. So clearly the Barr campaign, if they believe those independent polls were accurate, they wouldn't have released an internal showing he's back in second place again. I think those were just poorly done. And if you talk to the politicos around Kentucky, they'll tell you they feel like those polls, the independent polls, did not hit on the pulse very well. And I think it's because of that off-year election. I don't know how much you want me to go into polling methodology that people go with, but the fact we have an off-year election can really skew our polls and picking the right audience to poll here in Kentucky.
Well, and I think that it's also important to remember that like polling is such a small sample group. Like a lot of those polls are like 800 people, right? Out of,
Sure.
whatever potential total number of voters you're going to end up with. Do you off the top of your head, do you remember maybe in a recent election how many total votes were cast in general? Like,
Yeah, so in this election, in this primary, I'd expect it to be around 400,000 votes cast. Exactly to the number 400,000 was 2 years ago when Rand Paul was running for re-election and he had a primary. That's how many voted in that primary. That wasn't even a competitive primary. So you may see that creep up more to 410, 420. So you will see a fair amount. And to your point, when it comes to audience sampling, and this is a problem, is if you oversample, for an example, the 6th congressional district, Andy Barr is going to poll higher than maybe somewhere else. Or if you oversample Louisville, where Daniel Cameron has lived for a long time, you could end up with a slightly skewed poll in his direction. So to me, polling gives us an idea of the direction of the race. It doesn't give us an idea of, exact percentages per se, but you won't see a poll that's 20 points off or something, but they can give you a good idea of the direction, and they may be off by a few percentage. If somebody's polling 5% lower, there's a good chance that person can still win. If they're polling 20, 30% lower, that's not a polling error. They're literally just doing that badly.
well, and so I think that what we can take away from that is that currently in the polls, Cameron and Barr are the most competitive against each other, and Morris is kind of really trailing. Now, what I think is interesting is that it doesn't seem like Morris has any intention of dropping out of the race. When
No.
we look at his background of not necessarily having the same name ID, maybe as Barr or Cameron, just as having been in races before, Morris comes with this background of like having $10 million of Elon money put into his campaign and having ties to JD Vance and Charlie Kirk endorsement before he died. And I also think that was interesting. You know, we watched their first primary debate was the other night, and he was name dropping like Vivek Ramaswamy, right? So it
Yeah, Vivek
definitely
has endorsed
seems,
them. Yeah.
yeah, it definitely seems like he is trying to seek out the new MAGA base, the kind of like young new political up and comers that might be like the future face, which I feel like is a real not a contradiction, but a very different wing of the Republican Party than a Mitch McConnell
Well,
wing.
I think, in my opinion, just be honest, Nate Morris is a tech bro. He's a tech bro. And so it makes sense that the Elon and because that's the world he was. I mean, I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with the world of startups and that tech bro startup world, but it isn't much like politics. It's not a giant world. It's, relatively small, especially if you have a company that people did make money on that gets notice. And so in that tech world, you do have the Elon, the Vivek. I mean, JD Vance was in private equity, right? So you have or startup funding and everything else, and so you have these people that he just knows from that world because he was successful in that world, and they all go into politics, of course, too, as well. And so it does. There's a lot of friendships that are garnered there. What is interesting, though, about why he's trailing, because personally to me, I mean, he's dumped, I think, so far, I think like 4 million. And that's without even counting the Elon Musk money. And if I spent $4 million dollars and was polling at 15%, I would be pissed.
Seriously,
Like,
not
I
to
would
mention
be,
because I saw there was like 4.4 million as a loan from his own business. Like
yeah,
there's a decent chunk of that that's also self-funded.
yeah. And so I would be pretty upset. And I personally believe, and this is where I think, so his game plan from the start has been, I'm going to get this Trump endorsement. Well, in order to do that, you're going to end up having to work with people who aren't as good at campaigning as they are about just having connections as your consultants.
Mhm.
And I think this is a really big problem right now in politics in general is one, candidates aren't picking their consultants, consultants are picking their candidates. If a well-known consultant chooses to work with you, you should be honored by that. It's not like the candidate is hiring the consultant. It's the other way around. And the problem becomes is that you have people that are known losers and aren't good at this at all, but they get along with the right people, so you hire them because you think they'll give you the right connection. I mean, a perfect example to me is somebody like Scott Jennings. He's I don't know if you know who he is,
Yeah.
but he's a CNN commentator, everything else. He's actually from Kentucky, he lives in Kentucky. I think he still lives in Kentucky, but he has a group called Run Switch that is a consulting firm here in Kentucky. It consults, and I don't think there's been a single statewide race he's won. Personally speaking, out of the firm, there might have been one or two, but there hasn't been a ballot initiative he's won or anything else. But yet, every time there's a ballot initiative, he's the company that gets hired because, well, he's Scott Jennings,
Right.
and so the hard part for Nate is he's running this outsider campaign.
Yep.
His ads, his campaign, though, the feel, even the way he talks, feels like an establishment, well polished
Totally.
politician.
Totally.
And I think you don't have the name ID, but you're also not coming across as, an authentic, real outsider. You're coming across as like, oh, this is just a politician in waiting. He just hasn't been elected yet. That's the only difference between him and a career politician.
Totally. I mean, and from just based on how I saw him in the debate, to me, he was the most polished speaker out of all three. He was saying the least amount of ums. He wasn't really tripped up over some questions the way some of the other ones were, but he was a total slick Rick. I mean,
Yeah.
you could totally see that he was more focused on fighting for himself than he was to acknowledge anything about a rural Kentuckian who has real life problems and is looking for somebody who will represent them properly in the Senate, right? And I
Yeah. I mean,
feel,
yeah, to me, Nicole, I've always said he seems like, and I like him personally. I've talked to him a lot, and personally, I like him a lot. And he's not like this in person, but a lot of times in the political situations, he seems like to me like he's actually an introvert that read a lot of books, like how to win friends and
Mm-hmm.
influence people and
Mm-hmm.
sales books and how to talk to people books. And he's executing the best he can, but it's just not really who he is.
Mm.
And so I think it comes across very rehearsed and slick to your point because it is rehearsed because he's just not naturally a talker like that, you
Mm.
know. That's just my opinion. I mean,
Sure. Well, and I also think that there's this aspect of like having the background in tech. Again, how does that actually relate to a rural Kentuckian? Because I was talking with Aaron about this last week. It's like this idea of all the data centers wanting to come in and all of
sure.
these new tech initiatives that may have impacts on regular people in Kentucky? And is he, as a tech bro, going to advocate more for those initiatives than maybe the wants of people in Kentucky? And, we're not really totally clear on how this may hurt or benefit our communities yet. It might add
Yeah.
jobs in the moment, but long term take them away. And we don't know the impact on our environment, or this is land, Kentucky land. And so I think that sometimes that all comes across all too clear. I know we're picking on Morris a little bit, but it's just because I feel like he's a little bit of the underdog. But with all of these high level connections, you
Well,
just
I think
wonder.
if I could sum up your statement in like a sentence, right now, Morris, his game plan, his campaign has been a campaign to Trump, not to the voters. His
Correct.
game plan is get the Trump endorsement. Perfect example of this. He's running ads on tariffs. You can like tariffs, you can hate tariffs. I've never met a single voter who is like, my single issue is tariffs. If
Tariffs.
you're not into tariffs, then I'm not voting for you. Now, I have met people that don't like tariffs,
Yep.
but even the people who are for tariffs are not like doggedly like, I'm definitely for
That's my
tariffs.
single issue.
Yeah, but yet he's dumped, I would imagine, somewhere around 600,000 to $1 million into an ad that was talking about tariffs and how much he supports them.
Mm.
That is an ad for Trump. That's not for the voter. And if he gets a Trump endorsement, then that plan worked out great for him. If he doesn't, then, I don't see his path there.
Spinning wheels. Well, and so again, this is this really interesting thing to me because I feel like the other two have more of this lifelong politician aspect to them, right? They've always kind of, well, they're more of a political figure in
Yeah, yeah,
Kentucky.
they've
Okay,
all
I'll say
been.
that.
I would say both of them. Now, Cameron's only been in office 4 years before, but that being stated, I made this example earlier today. If you had somebody who was a lobbyist for 20 years that just decided to run for office, would you call that a lifelong politician? Probably. So they both, though, since like college have been involved in politics one way or the other.
Right.
Barr, before he ran for Congress, was one of the counsels for the governor. Like was in political positions.
Well, and so I think that there is this kind of resurgence almost a little bit of what I think was the original intent of congressmen and senators to be, were people that were successful in real life. They were businessmen, or they were, lawyers, and they had their own private businesses and experience, and then they came into the government and applied their knowledge. And I feel like over time we have gone way more towards just a general political class that holds the positions and just kind of trades out every once in a while, versus a more regular churn of like a common man who has had
Yeah.
private sector experience, who then comes in and applies that to government. And I
Well, I
feel like
think I think the electorate size has largely driven that. I mean, if you I can't remember the number, but if you took the congressman to person ratio that they had back when they first formed Congress to what it is now, we'd have something like 3,000 congressmen or something crazy like that.
mm,
And I think that speaks to the problem is these races are just really expensive. And so here's who you're going to get. You're either going to get a very, very, very wealthy businessman who can afford to shell out the millions and won't miss it to win an election, or you're going to get the person who can raise millions of dollars. And, let's just call spade spade. The people putting in this money, they are not doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. I mean, people call them donors. I call them investors. They're
Yep,
expecting a payoff for what they're throwing out there. And
totally.
that speaks largely too to how we vote. I mean, you know, people can lament money in politics and say, why does money buy politicians? But really, we need but look in the mirror. If the ads and the mailers and all that didn't actually win elections, then they wouldn't do it. I mean, how many people even bother to look up what their ballot should look like before they get to the ballot box? Nobody does. You
Right.
know, they're going to show up. I think 99% of the people voting in Kentucky will show up to the ballot box and be shocked there's 11 people running for the Senate. And that's not how people used to vote. Too many people vote. We politicians cover too many people, in my opinion. And it's just largely driven money to run the day, and that's what's led to what we have now.
Okay. So let's talk Cameron for a second. Okay.
Sure.
Because, like we spoke about before, he's kind of like held the higher position in the polls up until very recently. And I'm curious why you think that is.
I mean, it's just largely so here's where I'm at is that Cameron, he's ran so many times. Chances are every single person who's going to vote in that Republican primary, unless they just turned like 18 recently, has at one point checked a box for Cameron. And going back and saying, oh, I'm completely wrong to check the box for Cameron is, just not something people do. And so I don't think Cameron, even at the percentage she's at, I think the percentage she's at is probably the people that are pretty made up they're voting for him.
Hmm.
But when I think you look at the undecideds,
Hmm.
they're going to break heavy for Cameron. If you show up in the ballot box and you're still waffling, I think you break for Cameron because he's the guy you voted for him before. He's just your default. Normally an open seat there may be, undecided really means undecided. I feel like in this race undecided really means Daniel Cameron
Okay.
because you voted for him before. Um,
He doesn't
you
have
know,
like loser stink on him for losing to Bashir.
see, here's the thing is that I think that argument is okay to make to a degree, but Cameron did say the other night, I mean, he pointed out that Andy Barr has lost to a Democrat before too. He ran before and lost before he ran again. Um, Cameron is the only one who's actually ran statewide and won out of the three against a Democrat too. He's done that before. But at the same time, I don't know how willing the Republican electorate actually is to punish somebody for losing. Whether that is because they don't completely trust their elections, but look at Trump, look at Kerry Lake out in Arizona, look at Brandon Herrera, who just won his congressional race. I mean, they just don't punish losers. That's just I have not seen that historically where people punish people who've lost before. Comer, who's right now was it District 1 congressman out of Kentucky. I believe he's District 1 or 2 1. He lost a race for governor in a primary and then went on to win Congress. Matt Bevin, who was the governor before Bashir, he lost in a primary to Mitch McConnell, went on to become governor. I mean, I don't think the losing side of things and also too understanding in concept, Kentucky has not been a Republican state for very long. It just hasn't. In fact, there has never been a Kentucky Republican governor that served two terms. There's never been one that served two terms. There's been several Democrats. Now, you couldn't serve two terms until 1992, but there's been several Democrats who've done it. Bashir, his dad, a few others. But there has not been a Republican. We've had three Republican governors in like the entire history of Kentucky, and they've each served 4 years. So think of how long Kentucky's been around. 12 of those years, a Republican's been governor.
Mm.
And so,
Okay,
I get the knocks on them, but
yeah,
at
that's a
the
good
same
point.
time, it seems odd because you look at like Trump, but when you look at Kentucky's history, I mean, we haven't elected a Democrat senator since the 80s. But yet, since then, we've had several Democrat governors. We've
Mm.
had more Democrat congressmen. We had a Democrat majority in our state house until 2016.
Mm.
So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's just part of Kentucky coming along. I think Andy Beshear probably will be our last Democrat governor for some time, for decades, in my opinion. But I don't know. I don't think it's because he's an incumbent. I think that plays into it too.
Okay. And then what's your take on Barr? Because he has this congressional background. He's got a bunch of committee positions that give him a lot of just voting experience and intelligence experience, relationships like we're talking about. Um, but he is more based in Lexington, which doesn't make him necessarily well known outside of the sixth district. So I'm curious what you think that statewide the perception of him is.
I think he's gonna struggle with the perception that he's not like pretty liberal. So to give you an idea here, Barr was used to be prominently displayed. I don't know if he still is. I'd have to go look, but he was prominently displayed on a group called Main Street PAC. Have you ever heard of this group, Main Street
No.
PAC? So it's a group that's like bipartisan, and they heavily back people that they say are moderates that get things done. And Andy Bashir was like on their, not Andy Bashir, sorry, Andy Barr was on their front page of that. He was like one of their congressmen that they helped get elected and stay elected. And his voting history is that of, it's not exactly inspiring, whether it's voting for the Ukraine war, voting for every single spending bill. He's had statements where he says, we owe it to the Afghani refugees to give them citizenship here in Kentucky. Uh, I used to live in his district for years. And so I've heard him speak a lot. And I mean, to give you an example of, he talks about DEI and stuff, but all the time he would talk about, hey, we need more women minorities running as Republicans. And he would cite this woman who just won in Texas and be like, we need more women minorities running for Republicans. We need to support that, which is peak DEI to me. But anyways, no, I don't have a problem with women or minorities running. I just don't see why that matters more than are they a good
Good
conservative or not
candidate.
personally.
Right. Right.
But regardless, I remember I was in a Lincoln Day dinner, which is like a Republican Party dinner event thing, if you don't know what those are. I was in a Lincoln Day dinner. This was Fayette County, which is Lexington, Lincoln Day dinner. And he was giving this speech about why we need to keep giving money to Ukraine and how amazing Ukraine. He even brought like Ukrainians up there to like talk about it. And a guy stands up and starts talking about how this isn't America and everything else, and he has him kicked out. Like it was just, that's who he is. I mean, he after January 6th, he came out and said, "Hey, Trump's culpable." He donated to 6 or 7 congressmen who voted to impeach Trump in their
Mm,
reelection campaign. I mean, this is just a guy who, when he thought Trump's political career was over, much like McConnell thought, he was
yeah.
happy to jump off the Trump train and yell at him. He's sticking up his finger, feeling the wind wherever it goes. And in this race, statewide, you have to be more conservative than he's ever been.
Mm,
I think he feels really uncomfortable doing so. You watch that debate performance, a lot of ums, not very polished. I said he seemed like a bad door-to-door salesman that was just really happy. He opened up the door and was just trying to get out as much as he could, as fast as he could, as
yeah.
excited as he could
Yeah.
before you slammed the door in his face. I've heard some other people say he looked like a cracked out weasel. I've heard other people say that he was like a drug addict asking for gas at a gas station. I've heard like a lot of
I
comments on
think
this. I did
to
a
me, I would go deer in the headlights a little bit. Like a
deer in the
little shell
headlights. Okay.
shocked, a little like wide-eyed and like caught like he didn't know what to say.
Because
Um,
he's just not, like if you or I are putting forward our beliefs, we can debate them because we
believe
know
them.
what our beliefs are.
Right.
But if you're trying to be something you're not,
Yeah.
you are like, oh, I don't just like naturally know the information I need to draw upon.
Right.
If somebody's debating me on DEI, I can go grab archaic things like, oh, Fayette County schools want different rules for minority kids and white kids on late policies. That's racist. And,
Yep.
you can't really argue back with me because that's like archaic. But if you're like, DEI is bad, and then you're like, give me an example of DEI, and you don't really think that, so you don't have any stories to tell,
Right.
it's a struggle.
Right.
And plus, not to go down this road, not to offend anybody, but he's an Episcopalian, so
Well, I mean, so is there a background between Barr and McConnell?
yeah, for sure. McConnell really helped Barr get all 3 of them, by the way, Morris, Cameron, and Barr have all worked for McConnell at some point, which is
Well,
interesting.
I mean, how can you not in Kentucky politics? I mean, he's been
Yeah,
around
it's
for
hard
40
not to.
something years. And again, prior to like 2020, McConnell was like a trophy on the shelf, man. I mean, he was really there. He had a lot of legacy. He had a lot to do with the Supreme Court. He was a big, I mean, there was a lot there that made him seem like a good, solid conservative, right? Am I
I
wrong?
wouldn't say a solid conservative per se, but
Okay.
what I would say to your point is that McConnell um, exemplifies exactly why these federal elections are really important to people who follow state politics. Because McConnell understood that his political power doesn't come from his vote, it comes from his control of money. And for a long time in Kentucky, if you want to be the one to raise the hundreds of thousands or millions you needed, McConnell had to pick you because he could turn on those spigots.
Mm.
He would do the bidding of the big donors, and in return, they would give him money and allow him to control how money flows. And so, yeah, it was hard to get elected in Kentucky without McConnell's blessing because you just couldn't come up with the money to do it.
Where do his people and his donors and his money go now?
Indy Bar.
Okay.
Yeah, they're going to Andy Barr. They don't go to Cameron anymore. Cameron used to kind of grab some of his money. He got some of it during the governor primary. He got pretty much all of it during the governor general. Though it's interesting is Yass really put a lot of money into him during the governor general. But Jeff Yass. But regardless, um, now I looked at it the other day. Andy Barr had a fundraiser where like 90% of the people listed off were all people who donated to McConnell before.
Mm.
So it's Andy
Is
Barr's
this
picking
like
up the McConnell tab.
is that like the resistance de la Trump? Like is that like the people like because I feel like again, my take on McConnell in the last few years is like he's kind of turned on Trump and Trump's agenda a little bit. He's kind of voted opposite for the most part.
Yeah, he
And
has, but I don't think it has to do as much with resisting Trump as Trump exists. I mean, they find him distasteful in the sense that how dare this guy not go through the ranks like the rest of us and get chosen, like we all did and have to work
Mhm.
his way up. How dare he just come in and win?
Mm.
But I think it's more about the way McConnell has always done politics is I'm going to do the bidding of the big donors
Mm.
and I'm going to flow that money down to the big donors.
Mm.
And what he's doing now is really just, hey, I'm not afraid because understand this. Most of these congressmen, most of these senators, they don't like Trump. They don't like him at all. They're
Right.
just doing it because they're really afraid he's going to come out against them in a primary. And they're deathly afraid of it. And because they're so afraid of it, they are more politicians care about three things: getting elected, staying elected, getting elected to higher office. And so if they believe that Trump is their biggest threat to them getting reelected, they're going to follow that threat. However, if their biggest threat is I won't bring in the millions I need to campaign, they're going to follow that. So they're weighing that out. And McConnell's just he's not running for reelection. He's worried about bringing in as much money as he can for from his donors to continue to flow down and fund his network after he's passed. And I think that's a large part of just kind of why he's quote unquote gone bad, I guess you could say. I don't think it's as much he's gone bad. It's just that the Republican Party as a whole is more afraid of Trump than they are their donors. And he's the one who's not.
So when we talk about these three candidates, what do you think their main differences are re-platform? Like what are the differentiating factors? I know you said Barr leans a little bit more liberal. So what
Sure.
does that mean and what he might potentially vote for? Are we talking like so you were talking about the Afghan refugees. Is he more liberally leaning on immigration, for instance? Like, is it a business thing? Like, where do you think?
He's Yeah, I think the best way to describe him would be like a Chamber of Commerce Republican. That's who he is. So, Chamber of Commerce gets really weird at times, the things they go for, and sometimes they're conservative, sometimes they're not. For an example, I don't know about there, and you're in Tennessee, right? I don't know about Tennessee, but I know like in Kentucky, for an example, Chamber of Commerce is really, really big about like free childcare because they want more moms, but moms and dads working instead of taking care of their kids, which as a conservative, that flies like, what are we conserving? We're conserving the family. To me, that's part of what we're conserving, the family unit on top of our country and a lot of other things. But the family unit falls in
Traditional
there.
values, yeah.
Yeah, traditional values. Well, traditional values is, hey, your legacy is your children. That's your most important thing. And so do what you can, if you can, for somebody to stay home and raise the kids. I know you can't, not everybody can afford that, but do as much as you can to be engaged in your kids' lives and raise your kids and not let somebody else do it, because that is your legacy. That's what you're conserving. And so the Chamber of Commerce coming out and saying, we don't want that, that flies in the face of it. And that shows itself in things like immigration. The biggest difference between you'll find in public policy between Andy Barr and Nate Morris, for example, is on immigration. Nate Morris says, hey, stop all immigration. I want, quit it, deport everybody. I guess you'd call more extreme on immigration if, I'm not saying that as pejorative, just that's what it is.
Well, like, I
Andy
mean, a
Barr's more the
complete,
type, yeah, Andy Barr's more the type to say, like, well, if we get rid of the immigrants, who's going to do these jobs? Like, he's more likely to say, look, if you're not a criminal outside of you came into this country illegally, we'll give you amnesty. So that way the companies continue to have their jobs. And look, it shines through. I mean, Andy Barr is big on the banking committee in Congress. And that's part of, goes into the banking side of things. This is what they want to see. This is what they want done. And so that'd be the way I describe how his policies kind of come about. As far as what they're publicly saying outside of immigration, you're not going to find much daylight between Andy Barr and Nate Morris. They're both, anytime they're going to be questions, they're all going to say whatever the president wants. The concern I have when somebody responds that way is Trump is only going to be in office for 2 out of the 6 years that you are guaranteed to be in the Senate if you win.
correct.
What are you going to do when you don't have a leader like Trump that you're that afraid of, that has that much of a control on the electorate that you fear it? How are you going to think when you think for yourself?
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
What are your thoughts?
Exactly.
And I think you saw this yesterday or 2 days ago, or when the Republican debate, and Barr was asked, hey, do you believe in boots on the ground in Iran? And he basically was like, whatever Trump wants.
Yep.
And,
I feel like I heard that multiple times. So let's transition. I like this segue into the debate because I think this debate was super interesting. It was 2 nights ago. So a Monday night. Today's when we're filming Wednesday. Monday night was Republican debate. Last night was Democratic debate. Okay. And I just think that broad strokes first, the way that they set up the lighting, the background stage effects, and the 3-person panel on this Republican debate was not as apparent to me until I saw the Democratic debate.
Yeah.
And they have this beautiful studio set up, the Capitol on the background. It was all backlit with gorgeous, like, light colors.
It was done well.
Oh my gosh, the lighting wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it made the Republicans look like the depths of hell, for crying out loud.
The difference here is, so the Louisville's in Jefferson County. The Jefferson County Republican Party put on that debate. Then they invited in the media to broadcast the debate. I don't know who was in charge of the lighting. I don't know who. I was told that it looked better in person than it did on TV.
Well, we checked from the camera because gee whiz.
Yeah, I know. And that's like, so if the TV stations didn't set it up, they didn't set it up. Now, as far as the moderators go, I understand saying, well, we want this on as many TV stations as possible. So we're going to let these TV people host it, make them feel special. So they'll go ahead and carry the debate. The problem with this entire process, and I think you noticed this in the question asking, is when you don't have conservatives asking questions, you get weird questions. For an example, during the Republican debate, Mario Anderson, he was also the one who moderated the Democrat debate that you saw. Mario Anderson, they had a section of the Republican debate where everybody was asked like a critical question.
Right.
And Nate Morris's question was basically, you're trash. Everybody says you're trash. Why are you trash? And that was like the whole question. Like, it was very cutting and I didn't think it was fair at all. I didn't think that was a fair question. But Regardless, that was a question. And it would have been as bad if they didn't turn to Mario Anderson to do Andy Barr's question. And his question
Correct.
was Al Cross, who's an extreme liberal commentator and opinion columnist for the Courier Journal out of Louisville. Al Cross says you're racist, your response. And to a conservative, like, that's a softball. I would love to get asked that. A liberal called me racist?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me
Yeah.
use that as an opportunity to win some Republican votes. Like, that's not a critical thing. That's not. They said, here's our questions from your harshest critics. And that may be harsh to you because you're a liberal, but as a
Right.
conservative, the harshest critic is your voting record sucks. You
Yeah.
say my cutting question to Barr would have been, you have said national debt is one of our greatest problems this nation has. Yet every time it's come up for a chance for war, you have refused to vote against sending our money overseas. You've refused to stop spending money on war, and you voted for constant increases in spending. If spending is such a big issue, why doesn't your voting record reflect your feelings on that? Like, that would be an equally as hitting question as Nate Morris's equally as hitting question. But instead, they're like, Democrats called you racist, your response. And like, that's not a
It's
really
almost like a
good
feather in the
question.
cap. Like, okay.
Yeah, like, thank you for that softball. And then Daniel Cameron's was, you lost to Andy Bashir. Why should we trust that you could win? And what's interesting, or what are you going to do different or something? What's interesting is he should have had a more practiced response to that, because I know that's the biggest knock against him. But geez, oh, Pete, you could have said something like, you said you stand up here on your principles, everything else, but during COVID, the lawsuits that you did bring against Bashir, you waited until you saw cases that were going well that private citizens had brought, and then you joined them.
Mm.
Why can we trust you that you're going to fight when it took other people pulling you along during COVID to fight against the governor?
Mm.
That would be a hard-hitting question.
Yeah.
That would be just as critical as the other two. But they asked what I would call a softball that he should have been ready for. So you have that. But if you contrast that with the Democrat debate, it was put on by one station in their studio, Spectrum, in their studio. I've been in that studio. I've done interviews in that studio. It's a very well-lit, nice studio. But also, I think part of the tenure there is that, one, and you can tell from the first two questions they were asked, it is assumed right now that the Democrat's going to lose. Because, as I said, Kentucky has not voted for a Democrat senator since the 80s. And it's only gotten more Republican since then.
Right.
I understand the knocks against Daniel Cameron, that he lost Andy Bashir and everything else. But, to me, it's whoever wins the Republican primary is almost guaranteed to win
Right.
the general. I mean, Mitch McConnell, as a disliked incumbent, I think his approval rating was like 35%, still got 65% of the vote in his last election in 2020. So, I mean, it's just assumed that's the case. And so I think what you kind of saw was almost a debate over who's going to be president of the knitting club. Like, it just wasn't as important. But also at the same
very
time,
soft. I got to be honest with you. It felt very soft. It felt very like you're saying.
Yeah. I think also in their background, though, they can't they know. And I'm sure the Democrat Party and the funders have kind of let them know, because they're not getting a lot of money from in-states, out of state, have let them know, if you want any chance of winning in November, you guys can't go at each other's throats, because anything to not bring together all of the voters we can, including making it personal and going at each other hardcore, is going to lead to a loss in November for whoever wins.
Right. Well, so it's so interesting because I felt like I took this screenshot of the debate and I put it on my X feed because I thought it was hilarious. It was just this screenshot of Cameron sat back, kind of like chilling, and Barr had his finger pointed at Morris, and Morris had his finger pointed at Barr. And it was like Morris definitely, in my opinion, put on this fighter kind of personality. He was the first one to talk over his buzzer. He was the first one to interrupt Barr when he was saying something that he felt like wasn't true, right? He was definitely more of he put on him a little bit of an aggressive persona, right? And that kind of opened the door for Barr to fight back in kind, right? He started interrupting again. They both tell you that's not true. That's a lie.
Hate each other. They personally hate each other.
It was
they used to be
clear.
friends. They used to be friends. Nate
Ooh.
Morris donated to Barr. Barr used to go to his Christmas
Well,
parties.
that came
Like
up
they live
too.
in the same city. So you got
Ugh.
to think, I mean, he's the congressman for an area that this guy who's worth several $100 million, maybe one of, if not the richest guys who lives in the area, lives in. Of course they know each other well, that's just how politics works. But it's
Right.
very
Well,
personal for them.
yeah, and that was blatantly clear in my opinion. Because and I also feel like it almost benefited Cameron that they were
Yeah.
slinging mud and he got to sit back and look like the more cooler head, right?
Sure. And he could have, I think he could have, one of my knocks against Cameron is he could have made a little more hay there. Like when it came a chance, there was like a back and forth, and there was one moment, I think it was about Nate Morris or something. And they asked Daniel Cameron to chime in, and he could have said what I would have said would have been, look, there's a lot being said tonight. Is Nate Morris, was his company into DEI and he signed the pledges and he's kind
Yeah,
of
that was
liberal and
interesting.
now he's not because he's running for Republican office? Sure. Does Andy Barr have a really liberal voting record and does like immigrants because he doesn't think there's enough Americans working and he cares more about corporate interest? Yeah. But you know what? I'm not going to get into the mudslinging back and forth. I think there's been a lot of that tonight. I'm not running against anybody here. I'm running for the U.S. Senate. And,
Mm,
I think that would have been an
mm,
interesting retort to say the least.
mm.
But it is very personal. And what's interesting too is you see those two going at it. You wouldn't know that the guy in the middle is the one winning.
Right. Totally.
like,
I
like,
wouldn't if I hadn't already looked up polls and looked at the history and spoken with Aaron, I wouldn't have watched that debate and thought Cameron was more of the front runner. But because again, I didn't think he was the most polished. I didn't think that he had the most rehearsed responses. It didn't seem like he was as confident in what he was saying at times as, for instance, Morris was with some of his responses. I don't even think that he fell into the flow of his opener until halfway through it. Which was again that I know there's nerves. I know like you're just trying to get the feel, okay,
yeah.
God, but again, at this level, at this point, I feel like some of those things should be really hammered down.
Yeah, I
Um,
would, if I was to look at the debate, I would say Nate Morris was the most surprising behavior based on his background,
mm,
if not Barr for different reasons. Like Nate
mm,
Morris behaving so well, considering this is his first ever like major debate, is surprising. While Andy Barr performing so badly was surprising. Now I've seen Daniel Cameron debate before. His style is a very laid back style. I think that to a degree, I think part of the problem and got into his head, if I was to guess, was especially because what I noticed was he was more confident when he answered first, less confident when he answered second or third. And I think it's because he had his rehearsed talking points, but they all are saying the same thing so much so. And he's
yep,
acutely aware he's saying the same exact thing as the
yep.
guy before him. I
Trump,
remember
Trump,
there was
Trump.
that moment where they asked, what do you owe to Mitch McConnell? Are you a Mitch McConnell guy or something? And Andy Barr responded with the classic Cam Brady response of like, I owe one thing to Jesus Christ, my Lord and
Yeah,
Savior, or
right,
something like that. Like
right.
the campaign Cam Brady kind of like Jesus, freedom, and the
America.
troops. Yeah,
Yeah,
America, Jesus, freedom. What's it mean? I don't know, but they love it.
right.
you know. So he had that response, and then it goes to Daniel Cameron, same question. He's like, Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior. That's and it was like the same thing. And so I think it was when he responded first, he was more confident. When he was responding second or third, and he knew he was saying the same thing as everybody else, but he kind of didn't know what else to say. He didn't sound as quite enthusiastic about what he was saying. That being stated, I don't think Cameron per se won. I think the mudslinging and arguing between Barr and Morris and how contrast that was because Cameron stayed out of it made Cameron come out of that debate looking really well
Yes, I agree.
because the other two couldn't stop going at each other.
I
And if
know.
they get stuck in that trap, I think that will lose this election for them above all else, that they can't stop attacking each other.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting to me also that he didn't take the bait because I don't know. I don't know how you wouldn't have caught it, but he's talking, and at the end of his like comment, Morris sneaks in, and you'll never be a senator. And he
Yeah.
just like he laughed at it, which I think was like kind of a good response. I mean, I
He
probably would
said,
have laughed in the moment too, but
I don't know if you caught it. He said he laughed, and then after a minute, he said he got kind of angry there
yeah,
about Nate
right,
Morris.
right,
He said
right.
he got kind of angry there.
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah, but that's how I interpreted it also as like, oh shoot, he's got some fire under him. Like, meaning Morris has some fire under him right now. Like he's starting to get really defensive, it seemed, just with the way that he was responding to Barr and how he started getting a little
Well, you've spent 5
catfighty.
million and are third,
Yeah.
trailing behind a
Oh, you're
guy
right.
who hasn't yet spent like anything on advertising. Cameron
Yeah,
has not yet. He'll
right.
probably raise close to 3 million during this race. It's funny that we're saying $3 million may not be enough, but that's
Yeah.
kind of how they think of it. But if
Well,
you'd
doesn't he
spend
have
as
on
much as
hand
Nate Morris
like
had,
less than 500,000? I think I saw he was like
um,
400,000 something on hand.
yeah, 400,000 or 500,000, something like that. The question is, I haven't looked at the spending reports, so that can seem like not a lot, but it depends on what you've done. Have you already bought your ad spots early on? Have you already paid for all your ad productions out of that money? Have you already, done all the groundwork of getting together all your signs and all your everything else? Where literally the money you have on hand from here on out is literally your ad buy money. I think that is part of it. And I think Cameron can go a lot farther with a little bit just because he has to remind people he exists, and that's pretty much it. Because he has ran in office and everything else so much. Um, but yeah, I think Nate Morris is just I think Nate Morris and Andy Barr are both really frustrated. They're getting really frustrated. I mean, Andy Barr's ads, he found a shtick that kind of got him some earned media a few weeks ago. And so he keeps trying to do the same thing with new ads, and it's just not hitting well.
Mm,
It's just turned into like outright boomer bait that just isn't baiting very well. And then,
mm.
Nate Morris obviously very frustrated with where he's at and that the polls have been so stagnant despite them spending the millions they have spent.
What do you think, what do you think the factor would be that would change Morris's ranking?
I right now, unless Morris fires his ad guys and literally just starts running the campaign, taking into account what is it that Kentuckians want to see, what is it that, speaking to Kentuckians and just really breaking the mold. I mean, his ads right now are the typical political ads. Um, and I think they're not hitting well because that you're spending all this money and you're not hitting well. And I think part of it is because their first ad was cool and was creative, and was neat, and he didn't do as well, and so they abandoned that because he didn't get a lot out of it right off the bat. But you started running this 5 months out from election day. People just aren't paying as much attention to it. But don't give up on this good, unique thing. So a change in messaging could help him out a lot. But for Morris, unless he comes in and gets a Trump endorsement or fires his campaign staff, at least the ones that are doing his messaging, and says, I'm starting over with like real solid messaging aimed at my electorate, not aimed at getting the Trump endorsement. That's all I care about. Um, I think those are his only two ways he's going to be able to do it. I don't think there's much for him there.
Well, and like when we talk about a Trump endorsement, like Trump doesn't endorse a loser. And if this dude is at 15%, it's highly unlikely that Trump's going to come out and endorse him with the potential for him to lose, you know?
Yeah, that's been kind of like my, I guess, argument against his current strategy of campaigning to Trump is that,
Right.
Trump cares more about where you're at in the polls. And if you can't, raise yourself in the polls, he's going to be a little more hesitant to come out there. Now, what's interesting is where uh, Morris has these relationships already with these people. It could lead to Trump just staying out of this race because he doesn't want to endorse a loser, to your point. But at the same time, all of his friends like this guy who's lower in the polls, and he doesn't want to go against them and Elon Musk and everything else.
Yep.
Um, It'll be interesting to see what the independent PAC ends up spending their money on. I don't think I've seen much of it yet of what their messaging ends up being. Can it be better? I don't know. We haven't seen Club for Growth came out pretty hard against Andy Barr early on in the campaign through independent expenditures. It'll be interesting to see if Club for Growth ends up picking that back up and ends up running the attacks against Andy Barr. They're kind of an anyone but Barr was what they were doing. That has petered out. I don't know if it's because Yass isn't as caring as much about the race. So he's like, I don't want to spend money in it because that's kind of his group, right? The Club for Growth is a lot of Jeff Yass money. But at the same time that Club for Growth was running ads against Barr, Americans for Prosperity was having events with Barr, and they're both funded by the same people. So that was kind of weird too, as well. I understand one's more about policy and one's about campaigning, but still, that's strange.
I feel like a lot
But
of the
for
money in Kentucky is a little strange to me. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. I think a part of it is where our money comes from, what our interests are in the state. That matters a lot into it. I mean, we have like a lot of foreigners with interest in Kentucky, a lot of foreigners because of the horse industry, like Middle
Mm,
Eastern, Irish concerns, of
mm.
what's going on
That's interesting.
when it comes to that side of things. So that has some weird interests that can drive some money, but it
Is
can
that
be strange.
okay? That's an interesting point. Does that have any impact on Barr more than the other candidates, or is that just general, you think?
I think it's in general. I think it affects Barr more just because he has more of the traditional donor class.
Mm,
Morris is having the new money kind of donor
right?
class, the not
Exactly.
very traditional, the Elon Musk, the JD Vance type people, the Vivek
Yep.
type people,
Yep.
the tech bros, the crypto people. Those are the ones who are going to be giving him money.
Yep.
Compared to Andy Barr is going to be the more traditional guys in the smoky room smoking
Yep.
cigars, saying, "Hey,
Drinking
let's
bourbon.
give this guy $1 million," and yeah, drinking bourbon. Um, and let's give this guy $1 million or two or whatever, and he'll do our bidding for us. So
Yep.
I think that's more the traditional. He's got more of the traditional donors, I guess
That's
you'd
what I
say.
see also. It's so interesting. It, again, I'll be super interested to see if an endorsement comes out. From where it stands right now, it doesn't really seem like it's going to happen. Um, and so then the other question I have is this, is that like we see in the Texas primary, okay,
Hmm.
that we have two, well, there are three candidates, one wouldn't drop out. It's kind of the similar numbers to what we're looking at here, except we have a greater undecided portion here than was in Texas. But the idea is that nobody broke 50%, so they have to go into a runoff. What does Kentucky election law look like? Is that
It doesn't
similar?
have. No,
Okay,
no.
so
We have
there's no
closed
runoff.
primaries and no runoff.
Okay. So whoever wins this is
Yep.
the candidate.
Whoever wins, if everybody gets an equal share, whoever gets 33.1% of the vote wins. Kentucky
Okay.
also has, so this goes into two, because we talk about these people. There's a lot of people who are upset because there are 11 candidates and they just don't get the airtime. And I understand those complaints and I hear them. However, what is Tennessee? So to run for Senate in Tennessee, what do you have to do?
So we have issues with being bona fide members. There, you have to be, even to run for like a county commissioner. Now, I've only been here for 8 months. My husband's
Sure.
Army, so we get bounced around a lot. But I have gotten involved in the GOP here, and even on lower levels, you have to have voted in the last three elections, including off years, like including like
Yeah.
midterms and stuff like that in order to be able to vote in a primary or in order to even put in a petition to be a low-level commissioner
Do you have a
anywhere.
signatures requirement too for ballot
Yes.
access? How many
Yes.
signatures?
I think it's something
It
like,
it's depends on the level. I
yeah,
sure.
I'm not sure for senator. I don't know off the top of my head.
You can look that up in a second. I'll
Yes.
tell you what Kentucky's is. So no matter what level you're running at, if you're running in a partisan primary, um, you have to have been a registered Republican. I believe. 1 year prior to the election day so basically November, the year before you run, I believe you have to be a registered Republican. And maybe you just have to be a registered Republican when you sign before the 31st of the prior year. So you have to have been a Republican the prior year, though, regardless. Then you need 2 signatures from other registered Republicans that live in the district you're running for. So if it's statewide, you need 2 registered Republicans anywhere within the entire state to sign attesting that you are a Republican and they believe you will follow Republican principles, and then pay $1,000, I think, for Senate. It's lower. It's much lower the lower you go down. Like it's like $20 for your local county commissioner, and it's like $100 for your state house rep or something like that. So $1,000 and 2 signatures, and you can run for Senate as a Republican in the primary here in Kentucky. And so because it's just whoever can get together 2 signatures, and if you have your wife and your adult son living in the house with you, and you're both all of you guys are registered Republicans, then you have it right there. $1,000 and your wife and son sign, and you can run for office too. And so because of that, we always end up with gigantic primaries. I mean, the governor's primary was like 12 people. Like we end up with tons of people running because there's no other signature requirements. And so because of that, on the debate stages and everything else, they always have some sort of requirement to get on the stage, whether it's $100,000 raised or polling at a certain percentage. The spectrum debate you watched for the Democrats was you had to be having raised a certain amount, or you have to have gotten at least 10% in a general election in that race before, right? Whatever that means. But so basically you have to say, hey, I'm a viable candidate. Now, there are people who take issue with that. Some grassroots candidates here in Kentucky that take issue with it. But I would ask, even those people, though, they're shilling for, I don't use that as a derogatory statement, they're just shilling for their candidate to get access to these debate stages. But they're not shilling for the other, 7 people to get access as well, right. Right. They just want access because they've decided they're a real candidate, but the others aren't. And objectively speaking, how do you come to that conclusion if it's not by polling or money? And quite honestly, how does it serve the voter at all to shove 11 people up on a stage for a 1 or 2 hour debate? I mean, we saw that with the Republican primary back in like 2016. There was like 10, 11 people running for president on that debate stage. And I think one of them got 4 minutes of talking time. Like that doesn't help anybody.
Even with the 3 on the stage, it can be like you don't get enough out of anybody. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like, how many questions are you going to get in, and how many topics are you going to be able to cover, and how much back and forth time are you going to give them? And then it cuts down to like, okay, you get 20 seconds to answer instead of a minute to, or you don't get to, have a response if somebody names you by name. And so I think that in total, it does really degrade the quality of the debate or what a voter can get out of it.
I went to many governor forums and things like that in 2023. And we had, 11, 12 people, however many running. And I was at forum. They're open to everybody. Some of these forums, anybody can come and talk. Nicole, I was at one where a guy running for office, he responds to a question, has 3 minutes to respond, responds to a question, uses a minute, uses the last 2 minutes to take out his phone and start playing a Beatles song and bobbing his head to it for 2 minutes.
Oh my.
Yeah. And I'm like, what does that serve the voter at all? Like, get this guy out of here. Seriously. But how do you say that guy can't come just because I don't like him? Like, that isn't fair either. So you have to have something to say, look, I happen to know some of the 11 running that are like outright crazy. Like one of them lives in my county. And every time he talks, he says that he's the great grandson of a German king. So therefore he deserves to be in the Senate because he has royal blood. And the last time he talked, he brought a knight's helmet and a glove and wore it during it. And so, that was exciting. But anyways, like that's one of the guys. Right. And that's not a real person. Like that's not a serious person at all. But how do we exclude him just because you're like, no, I am a serious person? Well, how do we know that? Your word? I bet you he could get 100 people saying he deserves to have ballot access to this debate stage. So without polling, without monetary raising, how do we know
Right.
who's a serious candidate and who's not? You know, and so I understand the concerns about the holding back, but at the same time, how do you serve the voter the best in making a decision? Because the facts of the matter is that even if you had all 11 people on stage, that's not deciding the election. It's
Right.
not at all. I mean, even that debate the other night, that's not deciding the election. The election would have to come down to those three and a margin of error of 1,000 votes for that debate to have changed the election outcome.
Interesting. So we'll wrap here. I have like a couple quick fire like questions for you, and then we'll close out. But what do you see emerging in your upcoming senator post McConnell era? Um, how do you think that it will be different from what was or the same?
Um, I think that political leeches are extremely adaptive. And depending on who wins, depending on who they end up bringing into their office, if they literally just move over the same exact McConnell staffers, then you're going to end up with the same exact thing that you're getting out of McConnell, the same exact people controlling it. If they end up bringing in fresh people, especially too from within the state, you could see something interesting. Now, as far as their actual voting record at the national level, I think your best case scenario, you end up with somebody who's, uh, maybe I'm trying to think of a senator that votes this way. I was thinking more of like a Tim Burchett or Jim Jordan within the House. Um, Tim Burchett is a House member, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If he's not, cut that out.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Well,
but
so yeah, it's interesting to me because, like we were saying before, we've got 2 years left to Trump. And for
yeah.
how much these guys are up there saying whatever the president wants, whatever Trump wants, da 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 da, it's like who's post Trump? Maybe this is a better way to frame the question. Post Trump, who do you think has the most original or principled ideas that will represent Kentucky?
Um, you know, so Barr's already a part of that system. So I think you're not going to get anything different than what you've been getting with Barr, just because we've seen what he's voted for in Congress. He's going to vote the same as every other congressman up there that's just voting yes when the party tells him to and no when the party tells him not to. The interesting thing about Cameron is I would say the same about Cameron. However, in this election, Cameron has been discarded by the McConnell machine. And
Right.
so he's seen the establishment kick him to the side, while at the same time, the kind of the anti-establishment, we here call them the Liberty Republicans, have picked him up to a degree. And the kind of the grassroots, really active Liberty Republicans, he's had a few of the legislators endorse him on that side of things. The anti-establishment people endorse him. And so that's where I think you get somebody who's more like a Jim Jordan. Cameron ain't gonna he's not gonna be as depending on your feelings about it, he's not gonna be like a Massey or something, right?
Right.
But he'll be somebody. I think Tim Burchett put out this statement where he's like, I didn't like this bill. It's a cruddy bill, but I voted for it anyways because it's the best we're going to get. So you might get that level of honesty out of Cameron. And I think he's more likely to say, burn it all down, kind of the McConnell machine because they discarded him. So he's like a lover scorned.
Hmm.
On the same hand, then you have Nate Morris, where I think he's coming in to a degree. I think he kind of just wants to be there per se. Um, but I think you probably get something more along the lines of, a JD Vance when he was in Senate, probably something like that. Because obviously he's going to lean heavy on JD Vance to give him pointers and staff up his office and everything else.
Yep.
And so I think you end up with something like that. So once again, maybe a little bit of a maverick, but maybe if we have like a good leader or a good president in place that can kind of direct them, they'll go that direction. They're not going to fight it. But at the same time, they're not going to stick their necks out to be run over.
Yeah, totally. Well, nobody wants to be run over. Okay, so this is my final question. It's a little related and a little unrelated. Um, More kind of Bashir related. I saw that the vote against school choice got
Yeah,
vetoed pretty
sure. Yeah.
much. And so I'm curious, I heard a lot about the school unions, or the teachers unions, I mean,
Hmm.
being very influential in this race. And I'm just curious if you think that has any interplay and how you think like politically that all shakes out.
Yeah. So once again, the interesting thing about our constitutional offices, that's what we call them, and that's our governor, our lieutenant governor who runs as a running mate with the governor once they've gotten past the primary, the ag commissioner, the attorney general, the state treasurer, the state auditor, and the secretary of state. They are constitutional officers. Now, I know in Tennessee there's some sort of weird appointment processes. I call them weird appointment processes with some of those positions and everything else. But here in Kentucky, they're all elected, but they're elected in an off year where only those offices are on the ballot. Only those are on the ballot. Nothing else is on the ballot unless it's a special election. And why that's so incredibly important to understand is it goes into the turnout side of things. So, real quick, if we look at, let's see, Rand election, I'm sorry, I have to Google it. I should have had these numbers up.
Google. No, it's
Uh, um, so if we look at like Rand, he ran in 2022 in the general, right? And so if we look at his vote totals, total number of people who voted in that election was 1.4 million. Okay, so that's a 2022 off presidential election year in the general. If you look at though how many people voted in the governor's election, that happened in 2023. So 1 year, literally 1 year later, and you look at the total number of votes, it's 1.3 million was the total number of votes, right? So you see, a, the turnout game becomes just a whole lot different when you're comparing 1.3 million to 1.4 million. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's just the turnout's a whole lot different. And so it becomes okay, who can you get to turn out? Who can you get to come out and vote in general? And so the teachers' union's part of that, where they took on Bevin. Bevin did a lot of things. It was death by a thousand cuts. Bevin lost to Bashir in 2019 by like 5,000 votes. And anytime that you have over 1 million people voting and you lose by 5,000 votes, you can point to a whole lot of things that caused your problems. I can point to the fact that he told Northern Kentucky the bridge into Ohio they'd have to put a toll on. And a lot of them work in Ohio, so they'd have to pay a toll every day as the reason why he lost. I could look at him going out to Western Kentucky and getting into it with their judge executives being a part of it, right? I can look at all kinds of different factors. I think what's a key, though, when they talk about the teachers' unions, is they tried to redo their pension plans in 2019, and the teachers marched, and there was this big, huge, biggest protest ever, and they were credited with taking down a few state house reps, and they get some of the credit for Bashir's win against Bevin. But once again, when it's 5,000 votes, it's death by a thousand cuts. Like you can afford to upset the teachers unions as long as you don't also upset all of Northern Kentucky by saying you're going to have to pay a toll to cross into Ohio.
mm,
Um, and so I think some of that is just for the House reps, a lot of their districts, especially rural areas, the school districts are their number one employer.
yeah,
That's who has the most employees.
yeah,
And so anytime the school district, if they can, stir up people against them, they will. And not until this year, we're right now passing a law to say that school districts cannot use their email lists to advocate for or against legislation or ballot questions. So when we had a school choice amendment up for a vote here in Kentucky, all these teachers, all these school districts were able to use their parents' email addresses that they've gathered over the years. So literally almost everybody who lives in the county,
right,
everybody who lives in the state, if at some point your kid went to public school, you were on their email list, sending out emails telling them, hey, don't vote for this bill.
right,
And That's really hard to compete against. That's worth millions of dollars.
Correct.
And so I think that's more part of it. You know, like I said, I think people create a boogeyman out of them to a degree here in the state just because of that history.
Mhm.
I think, especially too after COVID, and a lot of parents saw the behavior of the schools and teachers
Yep.
during COVID. I think a lot of that has dissipated
Dissipated.
personally. Yeah. And
Yep.
as you start to see too, you've had districts spending a lot of money. I mean, you're seeing districts like Fayette County Schools spending $25,000 a student, and the
Hmm.
parents are starting to sit there as teachers say things like, "Oh, we're not paid enough or anything else."
Right.
They're looking at how
And
much
my
they're
kid
paying in
with $500
taxes.
worth of school supplies when they come in, everything
Right.
else, you
Well, and
know?
they're looking at their tax bills. They're looking at how much you're spending per student, and they're like, "That seems like an issue between you and your employer.
Facts.
That's not between me and you. Like, I'm giving you guys enough. You need to figure that out amongst yourselves, you
Correct.
know?"
Yeah. And our
So,
outcomes are consistently dropping. So,
yeah.
hey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I lived in Elizabethtown for a few years, for like a year, while my husband was stationed at Fort Knox.
Sure.
I have a fond place in my heart for Kentucky. It was the first place I moved once I left home. And it was a really great experience. I met like so many wonderful women that I was a very young wife, which I'm from New England. You don't get young wives in New England. And it was my first experience with people and other women who kind of like took me under their wing and,
Sure.
taught me how to be a good wife and a good mom and everything else. And so I find interest in this race just because I'm fond of Kentucky, and also just because I think that I'm tired of seeing McConnell pushed around in a wheelchair, and I would like to feel
He should have
confident.
not ran in 2019. He should have made the decision not to run in 2019. I mean, not only that, but he's risked a Democrat getting appointed to the seat because if
It
he something happened to him, the law changed a few years ago at his behest, but it still is unclear if it's constitutional or not. We haven't tested it yet, but um, he had a big scare where he fell down, was hospitalized in
right,
2019, and then he goes, "I'm going to run for office at the ripe age of like 75," and it's like you are you're about to make the Ruth Bader Ginsburg mistake of staying
yep,
in too long till you die, and then you're replaced by a liberal
yep.
because of it, or in her case, a conservative because of it.
Well, I really think the whole Biden situation really influenced his group's decision to take him out, because we can see just how apparent decline can be from the outside, as much as you want to prop somebody up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And again, I'd rather not necessarily like it can be confirmed the rest are of sound mind, but at some level, like they can stand up and say their own comments towards
Well,
things, you know?
how I've always said is I don't want you so old that every time you vote on a bill, I feel like you're ordering for the table and you're going to leave before the check comes.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
I just feel like I have a rule. Here's my rule. If when I see you walk, I feel uncomfortable. Like I'm like this guy or gal,
He's gonna be all
eh,
right.
he's gonna be wiped out at any moment. Like one trip and fall, he's done for,
Done.
and you
Yeah.
know it. And you've seen it. You've seen it in elderly people where you see them walking, and you're just like, because keep in mind you go to these political events, and I've seen this too with Hal Rogers. They have to go upstairs to the stage. And if I'm watching them and I'm like holding my breath while they're going
Oh,
upstairs, I'm like,
yeah.
you are too old to be in
Well,
office.
not to mention if you need one person on either arm, like yikes, you know what I mean? Like it's nothing against people who are disabled, but being elderly and frail is a completely different conversation than being disabled, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so, and also like at some point, don't you just want to enjoy the rest of your life? Like, do you hate your wife that much? You don't want to go home anymore? Like, come on, give me a break.
I
Um,
maybe I think him and his wife get along. They love the power as far as I don't know how much you know about his wife. Do you know about that? His
I
wife?
don't know about that.
You should research his wife. I'm just going to say, so he's fairly wealthy, right?
Yes.
But his
Yes.
money does not come when people are like, how do you get so rich in office? He joined like without any money. His wife's like father was like this China CCP shipping magnate, and she's worth like is like billions, or her dad was worth billions, and he was a big member of the CCP, and they were big into shipping. That was like their big business. Yeah, you got to
Oh,
Elaine Chow's his wife. Just Google Elaine Chow, CCP shipping ties, and you'll see what I mean. Like his his father-in-law was a massive Chinese billionaire shipping magnate.
I cannot believe
And
this
you
is the
can't be a
first I'm
billionaire
hearing
in
of this.
China without being in the party. You know,
Seriously.
so yeah.
What? My mind is blown right now, honestly.
Yeah.
Um,
You
oh
know
my
she was
God.
Trump's transportation secretary in his first term.
I feel like
Mitch
we need
McConnell's
to just
wife.
stop this podcast real quick and then start a new one and have a whole nother conversation
Yeah,
on
yeah.
this.
There's like all kinds of interesting little things there. Yeah. Yeah. He
Oh,
killed the Kentucky coal industry in the 1990s. Killed it with the Clean Air Act. He moved all the coal jobs out to Wyoming. Knew what he was doing. He admitted to it. He said this is going to hurt Kentucky. That's why he created the coal severance fund that then got mismanaged by politicians.
oh
But
my
because
God.
he knew he was killing Appalachia coal when he voted for it.
Oh, so he must, that's another reason why he hates Trump, huh?
Yeah. So, and what's funny is the Wyoming senator he made the deal with, the sponsor of the Clean Air Act, who moved all the jobs from Kentucky coal to Wyoming coal because it was cleaner. I could go into how that works. But that senator was Biden's envoy to China when Biden was president.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Dirty,
Yeah.
dirty. Politics is
Yeah.
so dirty. You don't want to know the truth, honestly.
Yeah.
Gosh, ignorance
It's
is bliss
it's
sometimes.
it's little circles. They're little circles.
Yeah, of course they are. With money and influence.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you so much, Andrew. This has been
Sure,
awesome.
absolutely,
I
Nicole.
appreciate it. I
Anytime,
can't wait.
anytime you need some words on Kentucky politics, just call me up.
Listen, I'm gonna come back and we're gonna have a conspiracy conversation about China because I think that I think
Oh,
that's
we could. Have you seen the documentary The China Hustle yet?
no.
You
See,
need to
I'm
watch
telling
it.
you.
It's on Prime, and it is all about, you're going to watch it. It's going to blow your mind. It's all about how big banks allow China to essentially defraud our stock markets because they make money off of it. And so this guy, it's all about how, so China will list companies on the stock market, our stock market, but the companies aren't like real. They don't exist. They don't do anything. All the finances are made up. You can't enforce it because they're all over in China, but we let them list it. And like all the investment groups know, fresh Chinese company, dump money, buy, sell about 2 years in, because within the next year or two, it's going to go bankrupt. And so in the China hustle, they actually went over to China and like watched these companies. And it was like one guy in a guard booth. Nobody ever came in and out. And then they had investors call up saying they wanted to come check out the businesses that they're about to buy stock for. And they bust in a bunch of workers and ran a bunch of trucks in and out just for that day or two. And then as soon as they left, all that stopped. Yeah. You got to watch
Sounds
the
a lot like our
documentary.
fraud. Maybe we took a page out of their books. I bet they are fun. Oh my God. See, I'm very conspiracy minded.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to dump this on you at the end of this pod, but I look across the nation at all the fraud that we're coming up with. And it's like
Sure.
literally that playbook, damn near that playbook of like, oh, we're
Yeah.
going to pretend we have a company. We're going to get funded by the government. We're going to, use all these programs to get a bunch of money and have nobody here doing anything. And the second we think somebody's coming, we're going to go
Oh, it's
fill up the building and act like something's actually going on here.
yeah. I mean, it's at the state level too. I mean, we just had a spending port would come down, and for an example, we give millions to this first Saturday in May group, which does events around the Derby. The state government gives them millions and millions of dollars, and it's run by Bashir's former chief of staff, and the DNC, as a part of their fundraising group, sells tickets to the events put on by First Saturday in May. They include access to those events put on by Bashir. So he takes tax money, gives it to his buddy. The buddy puts on events. This is all the company does, puts on events just for the government for first Saturday in May that then the DNC turns around and sells tickets for. So, you know,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
This is
that's
why they,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. This is why they hate anybody who's
I could
like
I could talk
anti-establishment.
all I could give you example after example of that locally, but yeah, you should watch the China hustle, and it goes into why the government ignores it. The government knows it's going on, but they ignore it because it creates U.S. dollars for China, and they need China to buy our
Want.
debt,
Yeah.
and so they're allowed to defraud our stock market, so they buy our debt. But now we're going into more debt to China, so they have more control. It's like this cycle that we've gotten ourselves in, and we can't break it.
Oh my gosh. I'm
Yeah,
definitely
you'll have to
watching.
watch it.
Yeah,
There
I'm
you go.
definitely watching it.
The China
Okay.
hustle. I think it's on Prime.
Thanks, thanks, and I'm sure all my listeners will be happy to hear that too. And thank you so much. It was nice talking to
Sure.
you. I am
Absolutely.
give Andrew a follow on the Andrew Cooperrider Show on YouTube. And what's your handle on X?
At KY Cooperrider. So
It's a double R,
KYC.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Cooperrider. So just take the last name Cooper, Cooper, and Rider, Rider. And just put it together. Don't cut anything. So it's
Smash you.
Cooperrider.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nicole.